Hey guys, tonight we slip through the shadows of medieval Europe, where colossal stone castles loom like giants against a stormy sky. Picture yourself on a muddy path, the air thick with mist, as a fortress's jagged walls rise before you, promising safety or doom. These castles weren't just homes. They were life or death strongholds. And honestly, if you're caught outside during a siege, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I'm curious where you're drifting off tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand at the base of a castle's outer wall, craning your neck to see its top piercing the clouds. These walls, often 10 feet thick and 40 feet high, were the first line of defense, built to shrug off battering rams and catapults. Masons layered stone with mortar so tough it could outlast centuries. Some castles still stand today, like Dover in England, defying time itself. You trace your fingers along the rough granite, feeling the cold seep into your skin. The wall's sheer size screams power, but it's the clever design that makes it deadly. Angled bases, called taluses, deflect falling debris and make climbing a nightmare. You squint up, noticing slits for archers, ready to rain arrows on anyone dumb enough to approach. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some castles used rounded walls, not flat ones. Why? Corners crack under siege engines, but curves bounce the blows like a medieval dodgeball champ. You smirk, imagining engineers high-fiving over geometry. Historians still argue whether cost or strategy drove this choice. Curved walls took more stone and time, but they sure looked intimidating. You step back, eyeing the wall's crest. Battlements, those notched tops, let defenders duck behind merlons for cover while lobbing stones through gaps called crenels. It's like a deadly game of whack-a-mole, and you're not the mole yet. You shuffle along the wall's base, boots sinking in damp earth. The castle's layout isn't random. It's a maze of murder. Concentric castles, like Crac de Chevaliers, had double walls. Breach one, and you're trapped in a kill zone between them. You feel the weight of eyes watching from above, archers tracking your every step. The wall curves, leading you toward a ditch so wide it could swallow a village. That's no ordinary ditch, though. It's a moat, and it's got some nasty surprises. Before you get there, you glance back at the wall, its shadow swallowing you whole. This isn't just stone. It's a statement. No one's getting in without a fight. Your heart thumps as you imagine scaling this beast. Ladders? Good luck. Defenders would push them over with poles or drop rocks that'd turn your helmet into a pancake. You chuckle at the thought of invaders slipping in the mud, cursing their warlords' bright ideas. The walls weren't perfect, though. Tunneling or sapping could collapse them if you dug deep enough, but that took weeks, and you'd probably get crushed or smoked out. You sniff the air, catching a whiff of pitch from torches above. Fire was a defender's friend, but also a risk. Wooden hoardings, temporary roofs on walls, could burn if attackers got clever. You pause, picturing the castle's lord surveying his domain. These walls didn't just stop arrows, they stopped fear. Villagers, knights, even kings hid behind them, betting their lives on stone. You grin, thinking of the poor sap who tried to bribe a mason for a weak spot. Spoiler, it rarely worked. The wall's strength was its simplicity. Big, solid, and mean. You turn toward the moat, its dark water glinting under moonlight. Whatever's in there, it's not friendly. You take a deep breath, ready to find out. You stand at the edge of a moat, its murky water lapping at the muddy bank, daring you to cross. The castle's walls loom behind it, but this watery trench is no mere decoration. It's a medieval nightmare designed to stop you cold. You squint, trying to gauge its width, maybe 30 feet, and its depth, deep enough to drown a horse. Moats were the second line of defense, and they were as cunning as they were wet. Some, like Bodiam castles, were more for show, but others, like Caerphilly's, could flood an army's plans. Literally. You dip a toe in, then yank it back. The water's freezing, and something slimy brushes your boot. Moats weren't just water. You glance at the surface, spotting sharpened stakes hidden below, ready to skewer anyone wading through. Some lords got creative, tossing in dead animals, or worse, human waste, to make the moat a disease-ridden trap. You gag at the thought, but here's the quirky bit. One French castle reportedly stocked its moat with crocodiles. Yeah, crocodiles. Probably a tall tale, but you're not jumping in to fact check. Historians still argue whether moats were more psychological or practical. Did they stop armies or just scare them into hesitation? Either way, you're hesitating. You pace along the bank, looking for a way across. Swimming's a bad idea. Armor drags you down, and those stakes don't care about your courage. Boats. Sure, if you like being an archer's pinata from the walls above. You notice a narrow causeway, but it's a death trap, funneled to force invaders, single file, under arrow fire. You chuckle, imagining some knight slipping face first into the muck, his ego sinking faster than his sword. Moats worked because they slowed you down, giving defenders time to rain hell. You spot a glint, metal spikes embedded in the bank, ready to trip anyone rushing the castle. But moats had tricks beyond water. Some were dry, filled with thorns or traps, like giant medieval mouse traps. You peer into the gloom, half expecting a spring-loaded net. Others were fed by rivers, making them impossible to drain. You hear a splash, maybe a fish, maybe something hungrier. The moat's not just a barrier, it's a mind game. You're already second-guessing every step, and that's the point. Defenders didn't need to kill you here. They just needed you stuck, exposed, and cursing your life choices. You back away, eyeing the castle's drawbridge, its wooden planks taunting you from across the moat. Getting there means crossing this cesspool, and every option feels like a trap. You could try filling the moat with dirt, but that takes days, and the defenders aren't sipping tea while you shovel. Fire? Useless against water. You smirk, picturing an invader tossing a torch and yelling, "Take that pond." The moat's strength is its simplicity. It doesn't fight back. It just waits for you to fail. You crouch, scanning for weak spots. Some moats had secret pipes to flood or drain them, controlled by the castle's lord. If you could find one, you might cripple the defense, but good luck sneaking in to turn the valve. You recall those towering walls from earlier, their shadow now stretching across the water. The moat and walls work together, a 1-2 punch of stone and sludge. You stand, brushing mud off your hands. The drawbridge is your next hurdle, but the moat's already got you rattled. You take a deep breath, the damp air heavy with rot. Whatever's waiting across that bridge, it's not rolling out the welcome mat. You stare across the moat's murky expanse, the castle's drawbridge looming like a taunting gate to salvation or slaughter. It's raised, of course, its heavy oak planks chained tight against the stone gatehouse, daring you to try crossing. Drawbridges were medieval Europe's ultimate "do not enter" sign, a movable wall that could snap shut faster than your grandma's purse when you ask for cash. Built to span moats and block gatehouse entrances, they were engineering marvels, often counterweighted with massive beams to lift in seconds. You can almost hear the creak of ropes and pulleys, the defenders smirking as they crank it skyward. You edge closer to the moat's bank, imagining the bridge lowered, its planks thudding into place. Crossing sounds simple, but it's a gauntlet. The bridge is narrow, barely wide enough for 2 knights side by side, making you an easy target for archers perched in the gatehouse's murder holes. You glance up, spotting those dark slits where boiling water or rocks could rain down. Fun fact, one quirky defense involved dropping beehives. Picture a swarm of angry bees turning your siege into a frantic dance party. You snicker, but it's not funny when you're the one swatting and screaming. Historians still argue whether drawbridges were more about control or intimidation. A lowered bridge invited trade and allies, but a raised one screamed defiance. You feel the weight of that defiance now, the castle sealed tighter than a dragon's hoard. You study the gatehouse, its twin towers flanking the bridge's end. If you somehow cross, you're funneled into a stone corridor rigged with traps. You imagine charging across, only to hear the chains rattle as the bridge lifts mid-sprint, dumping you into the moat's slimy embrace. Not exactly a heroic moment. You kick a pebble into the water, watching ripples spread. Drawbridges weren't just obstacles. They were time sinks. Armies wasted days building rafts or battering rams, only to find the bridge raised and their plans mocked. You picture some warlord, red-faced, shouting orders while his men slip in the mud. The defenders didn't need to fight you here. They just needed you stuck, your momentum dead. You notice the bridge's underside, studded with iron spikes to deter climbers. Even if you swam the moat, scaling that would shred you like a medieval cheese grater. But there's a flicker of hope. If you could jam the mechanism, say, wedge a log in the chains, you might keep the bridge down. Trouble is, getting close means braving arrow fire and whatever's lurking in that moat. You recall those crocodile rumors from earlier and shudder. The drawbridge's real power isn't its wood or chains. It's the way it forces you to overthink. Every step feels like a trap, and that hesitation is the castle's victory. You smirk, imagining a defender waving from the gatehouse, knowing you're already losing the mental game. You back up, scanning for options. Some armies tried portable bridges, but those were clumsy and easy to burn. Others used siege towers, rolling right over the moat to bypass the drawbridge entirely. You glance at the walls, their archers ready to turn your tower into kindling. The drawbridge isn't just a door, it's a choke point, designed to make you bleed for every inch. You take a deep breath, the air sharp with damp wood and fear. Beyond that bridge lies the gatehouse, and something tells you it's even less welcoming. You steel yourself, ready to face what's next. You've somehow crossed the moat, the drawbridge thudding beneath your boots as you sprint toward the gatehouse. But before you can celebrate, a bone-rattling clang echoes. Iron bars crash down, sealing the entrance. This is the portcullis, a massive metal grate designed to slam shut like the jaws of a steel beast. You skid to a stop, staring through its bars into the dark corridor beyond. Portcullises were the castle's last-ditch gatekeeper, often made of oak, reinforced with iron, heavy enough to crush anyone caught beneath. You feel the weight of it just looking. Some, like at York's Clifford's Tower, weighed tons. You press your face against the cold bars, catching a whiff of damp stone and fear. The portcullis slides in grooves carved into the gatehouse walls, raised by winches, hidden in chambers above. You hear chains clanking as defenders crank it just to mess with you. The grate inching up, then dropping an inch to make you flinch. Here's the quirky bit. Some castles had double portcullises, so if you hacked through one, another awaited, like a medieval gotcha. You chuckle, picturing an invader's face as the second grate ruins his day. Historians still argue whether portcullises were more for defense or drama. They stopped battering rams cold, but their sheer menace could spook an army into retreat. You imagine facing this thing, your torchlight glinting off its spikes. Getting past it means brute force or betrayal. Lifting it takes time, and the winch room's guarded. You glance up, spotting murder holes in the ceiling. Defenders could pour sand, heated red hot through those, turning your armor into an oven. You wince, suddenly grateful for modern air conditioning. You pace before the grate, your shadow dancing on the stone. Some attackers tried hooks to lift the portcullis, but good luck dodging arrows while you pull. Others brought rams, only to find the bars too tough and the corridor too tight. You smirk, imagining a ram team squished like sardines, cursing their warlord's genius plan. The portcullis's strength is its simplicity. It doesn't negotiate, it just blocks. But it's not flawless. If you could sneak a spy inside to sabotage the winch, the grate's useless. Fat chance, though. Guards check those rooms like hawks. You back up, eyeing the gatehouse's towers. The portcullis isn't alone. It's backed by doors, traps, and more archers. You recall the moat's slime and the drawbridge's spikes, each defense layers on the last, wearing you down. The portcullis is the castle's clenched fist, daring you to punch through. You notice a side passage, maybe a sally port for surprise counterattacks. Tempting, but it's probably a trap, too. You grin, thinking of some poor knight charging in, only to find spears waiting. The portcullis doesn't just stop you, it makes you doubt every move. You crouch, peering through the bars again. Beyond lies the courtyard, the castle's heart. But this grate's laughing at your dreams of glory. You could try tunneling, but that takes weeks, and the defenders aren't napping. Fire? The grate's metal. Good luck with that. You sigh, the air heavy with dust and defeat. The portcullis is a reminder. This castle's built to outlast you. You stand, brushing dirt off your knees, and glance up at the towers. If you're going to crack this fortress, you'll need to climb higher and face whatever's waiting. You slip away from the portcullis's iron glare, your eyes drifting up to the castle's turrets, their silhouettes stabbing the night sky. These towers aren't just for show. They're the castle's sniper nests, where archers perch like hawks, ready to pick off anyone dumb enough to linger below. You trudge toward a spiral staircase, its worn steps winding into the gloom. Turrets, often built at wall corners or gatehouses, gave defenders a 360-degree kill zone. Think of the Tower of London's White Tower. Its turrets let archers cover every angle, turning invaders into pincushions. You climb, your boots scraping stone, the air growing colder with each step. The turret's walls are studded with arrow slits, narrow enough to shield archers, but wide enough to let arrows fly. You peek through one, the wind whistling past, and imagine knocking a longbow. From here, you could hit a target 300 yards out. Medieval sniping at its finest. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some turrets had squinting slits, angled to confuse enemies about the archer's position. You grin, picturing an invader dodging left, only to catch an arrow from the right. Sneaky. Historians still argue whether turrets prioritized offense or observation. Were they for raining death or spotting trouble miles away? You lean against the stone, catching your breath. The view's breathtaking, moat glinting, drawbridge raised, and that portcullis you dodged below. But it's a death trap up here too. If enemies breached the walls, turrets became last stands, with defenders fighting to the last arrow. You spot a wooden hoardings platform jutting out, letting archers lean over and shoot straight down. Nasty surprise for anyone hugging the wall. You crouch imagining the chaos of a siege. Arrows hiss past, crossbows clank, and you're dodging return fire from enemy ballistas. You chuckle, thinking of an archer fumbling his quiver, arrows spilling like pickup sticks. But the job's grim. Hours of aiming, sweating, and praying your bowstring doesn't snap. Turrets weren't comfy. They were cramped, drafty, and smelled of sweat and pitch. You notice a brazier, its embers glowing. Defenders lit fires to signal allies or ignite tar-soaked arrows. One wrong move, though, and the whole turret's a bonfire. You shift, your shadow flickering on the wall. Turrets gave defenders range, but they weren't invincible. Siege engines, like trebuchets, could lob stones to smash them, and a lucky shot might collapse the roof. You wince, imagining the crunch of stone and screams. Still, turrets forced attackers to spread thin, covering multiple angles while dodging volleys. You recall the moat's stakes and the drawbridge's chains. Each defense builds on the last, and these turrets are the castle's eyes and teeth. You smirk, thinking of invaders, cursing as arrows pin their shields like porcupines. You descend a few steps, pausing to scan the courtyard below. The turret's height makes you feel like a king, but also a target. If you were defending, you'd be counting arrows, rationing water, and eyeing the horizon for rescue. If you were attacking, you'd pray for a cloudy night to hide from these death towers. You take a deep breath, the air sharp with smoke and stone. The turrets have you rattled, but the castle's got more tricks, some wilder than crocodile moats. You head down, ready to uncover what's next. You descend from the turret's dizzying heights, your boots echoing in the stairwell, and emerge into a shadowed corridor leading to the castle's battlements. Whispers of a legendary defense, boiling oil poured on invaders, float through your mind, but you're about to learn the truth behind the myth. You lean over the wall, peering at the moat and drawbridge far below, imagining attackers swarming like ants. Boiling oil sounds like a medieval flamethrower, but castles rarely used it. Oil was pricier than gold. Think olive oil in 12th century England, imported and hoarded. Defenders weren't wasting it on some screaming Viking's head. You shuffle along the battlements, the wind tugging your cloak. Instead of oil, defenders dropped whatever was cheap and nasty: scalding water, hot sand, or molten lead. You wince, picturing a bucket of sizzling sand dumped through a murder hole. One quirky tidbit: some castles used heated manure. Yep, defenders scooped up stable muck, boiled it, and slung it at enemies. Nothing says, "Go home," like a faceful of weaponized dung. You laugh, imagining an invader's horror. Death by poo isn't exactly epic saga material. Historians still argue whether these defenses were practical or pure terror tactics. Scalding attacks could maim, but they took time to prepare, and castles needed every second during a siege. You pause, running your hand over Merlin's rough edge. The real defense was simpler: rocks. Big ones, dropped from hoardings or rolled off walls, could crush armor like tinfoil. You spot a pile of stones, some carved into balls for extra roll. It's low tech but brutal. Gravity does the work, and the castle stays stingy with its olive oil. You crouch, eyeing the gatehouse where the portcullis still looms. Boiling myths aside, defenders got creative. They'd hurl quicklime, a powdery chemical that burned skin and eyes, especially when mixed with water. You smirk, picturing an invader splashing through the moat, only to scream as lime dust hits his wet face. It's not glamorous, but it worked. The castle's whole vibe, moats, turrets, now this, screams efficiency over flash. You imagine a lord chuckling as his men lobbed kitchen scraps over the wall, turning a siege into a garbage fight. But there's a catch. These defenses needed prep. Boiling water meant fires, and fires meant wood, which sieges often burn through fast. You glance at the courtyard, where servants might have scrambled to keep braziers lit. If attackers cut supply lines, defenders could run dry, forced to chuck loose masonry or, gross, chamber pots. You grin, thinking of a knight dodging a flying latrine. The myth of boiling oil stuck because it's cinematic, but the reality was grittier, cheaper, and weirder. You stand, brushing dust off your hands. The battlements feel alive, each stone a story of a desperation and ingenuity. You recall the turret's arrow slits, the drawbridge's creak. Every layer of this castle builds a wall of nope for invaders. But myths like boiling oil show how stories twist truth, making defenders seem like evil geniuses. They were just people, scared and scrappy, using what they had. You turn, catching a whiff of smoke from a distant torch. The castle's got more secrets, and you're betting they're not all as clean as stone. You head toward the keep, ready for what's next. You weave through the castle's courtyard, the moonlight casting long shadows from the keep's looming walls. A siege is coming. Horns blare in the distance, and you feel the defenders' dread as they brace for months of lockdown. Castles weren't just built to repel, they were stocked to outlast. You duck into a storeroom, its air thick with the scent of grain and smoked meat. Medieval strongholds like Conwy Castle could hold years' worth of food, barrels of salted fish, sacks of barley, even live pigs ready for slaughter. You run your hand over a crate, marveling at the planning. Starvation was the enemy's best weapon, but a well-stocked castle laughed in its face. You step over a sack of oats, noticing water casks stacked high. Wells inside the walls, often dug to insane depths, kept defenders hydrated when rivers were poisoned or cut off. Here's the quirky bit. Some castles brewed their own beer, not for fun, but survival. Water could spoil, but ale stayed safe. You chuckle, picturing knights clinking mugs mid-siege, toasting their barley lifeline. Historians still argue whether stockpiling was about defiance or paranoia. Did lords trust their walls or fear every neighbor? Either way, you're glad for the supplies because the enemy's camping outside and they're not sharing. You wander to the armory where swords and crossbows gleam. Castles hoarded weapons, too, but the real trick was manpower. You hear shouts as guards drill in the courtyard, practicing for the inevitable. Defenders weren't just knights, cooks, stable boys. Even priests grabbed pikes when the walls shook. You smirk, imagining a monk swinging a mace like a holy action hero. But sieges weren't all fighting. You learn of waiting games where defenders sat tight, hoping attackers ran out of food first. Patience was a weapon, and castles were built for it. You pause at a window, peering at the moat and turrets you passed. Those defenses bought time, but survival meant logistics. Some castles had secret tunnels for resupply, risky since traitors could leak their location. You shudder, recalling that manure defense. Desperation bred wild ideas. Sieges could last months, even years, like Rochester Castle's epic stand in 1215. Defenders ate rats when stocks dwindled, and you're suddenly less hungry. The castle's strength wasn't just stone, it was the stubborn will to endure. One moldy loaf at a time, you move toward the great hall, where the Lord rallies his people. Morale was key. A grim leader could break the castle faster than a trebuchet. You spot a lute in the corner. Music kept spirits up, though you bet the tunes got old fast. You grin, thinking of a bard strumming the same ballad for the 50th day, everyone groaning. Sieges tested everything: food, water, loyalty. If supplies held, the castle could mock the enemy's catapults. But one bad harvest, one lazy steward, and you're chewing leather. You take a deep breath, the air heavy with dust, and resolve. The siege is just the start. Trouble's brewing inside these walls, too. You slip from the great hall, the echoes of the Lord's rousing speech fading as you wander deeper into the castle's maze of corridors. The siege rages outside. Catapults thud. Arrows whistle. But a darker threat lurks within these walls: treason. You pause at a shadowed alcove, the air heavy with suspicion. Castles, like Carcassonne in France, were betrayed more often than breached. A single disloyal soul, guard, servant, even a knight, could undo every moat and portcullis you've faced. You feel eyes on you, as if the stones themselves whisper warnings. You creep toward the guard room, where sentries should be watching the walls. Instead, you catch a hushed voice offering to unbar a sally port for gold. Treachery was a siege's silent killer. History's full of castles falling because someone opened a gate. Take Chinon Castle. In 1205, it fell when a turncoat let enemies in at night. You clutch your dagger, heart pounding. Here's the quirky bit. Some lords used food tasters, not just for poison, but to sniff out spies. Bad cooks were suspect. You smirk, picturing a chef grilled over a soggy stew, accused of signaling invaders. Historians still argue whether betrayal stemmed from greed or fear. Sieges broke spirits, hunger, boredom, and the enemy's promises of mercy could turn loyal hearts. You glance at a tapestry, its threads hiding a door to secret passages. Castles had these for escapes or counterattacks, but traitors knew them too. You imagine a servant sneaking through, lantern in hand, leading attackers to the keep. The Lord's biggest challenge wasn't the enemy outside. It was keeping his own people in line. You hear a creak and freeze, but it's just a rat. Or is it? You move on, passing the chapel where candles flicker. Even faith could falter. Priests sometimes smuggled messages to besiegers, cloaked as prayers. You recall the manure defense, grimacing. Desperation made everyone a suspect. Lords used brutal tactics to root out traitors, public floggings or worse. You wince, imagining the screams, but fear cut both ways. Guards might turn on each other, paranoia poisoning the air. You spot a locked chest. Maybe it holds the Lord's bribes to keep loyalty. Gold was a shaky shield when starvation loomed. You reach a window, the siege's fires glowing beyond the moat. Those turrets and drawbridges you passed feel useless if a gate swings open from within. You chuckle, thinking of a traitor tripping over his own cloak, blowing his cover. But the stakes are grim. One wrong trust, and the castle's done. Lords often slept with swords handy, not for invaders, but their own men. You turn back, the corridors chill sinking into your bones. The siege is a battle of wills, and betrayal's the crack that could shatter this fortress. You head toward the ramparts, where knights prepare for the next fight. But can they trust each other? You step onto the castle's ramparts, the night air sharp with smoke, as siege engines rumble beyond the moat. Armored knights, their visors glinting, stand ready. Your comrades in this brutal dance of defense. These warriors, the castle's steel spine, face relentless assaults. Their swords and courage, the last bulwark against the enemy's tide. Knights, trained from boyhood in combat, were the elite, like the Templars defending Castel Pellerin in 1291, holding firm against impossible odds. You grip a borrowed shield, its weight grounding you as you join their line, heart thumping like a war drum. You peer over the wall, spotting ladders rising through the dark, invaders climbing, arrows pinging off stone. Knights swing maces, their blows shattering helmets through the crenels. You duck as a crossbow bolt whizzes past, cursing your luck. Here's the quirky bit. Some knights wore padded undergarments called gambesons, so thick they could stop arrows, but made you sweat like a pig in plate armor. You snicker, imagining a knight, waddling, soggy but safe. Historians still argue whether knights were true heroes or glorified bullies. Did they fight for honor, or just their lord's land grab? You shift, shield raised, as a ladder thuds against the wall. A knight beside you shoves it back, his grunt echoing. These men aren't just muscle, they're tacticians, coordinating sallies to burn enemy siege towers or snatch supplies. You recall the portcullis's clang, the turret's arrows. Knights tie it all together, charging where defenses falter. But it's grim work. Sieges grind them down. Sleepless nights, meager rations, and the screams of wounded friends. You spot a knight praying, his sword bloodied, and wonder if he's begging for victory or just survival. You brace as rocks crash nearby, trebuchet shots shaking the ramparts. Knights counter with boiling water. Not oil, you remember with a smirk, and the invaders scatter, but the enemies relentless, their torches a sea of fire beyond the drawbridge. You chuckle, picturing a knight tripping over his own spurs, cursing in Latin, yet fear gnaws. Betrayal, like that whispered treason in the corridors, could undo these warriors. A knight's loyalty is iron, but hunger and despair test even the strongest. You tighten your grip, the shield's edge biting your arm. You glance at the keep, its shadow a reminder of what you're defending. Knights don't just fight for stone, they guard families, faith, and the hope of outlasting this hell. You hear a war cry, and suddenly you're shoving a ladder, adrenaline surging. The enemy falls, but more come, their faces lost in the dark. You recall the moat's stakes, the manure defense. Every layer of this castle screams defiance, and the knights are its voice. You exhale, the air thick with dust and dread. The fight's far from over, but something bigger looms, a shift that could silence these blades forever. You stagger back from the ramparts, the night's war cries fading as you slump against a cold stone wall. The siege's roar still echoing, but the castle's story is shifting. Its stone defenses, built to defy swords and catapults, face a new enemy: gunpowder. You squint through the dawn haze, spotting crude cannons among the attackers' ranks, their iron muzzles glinting like death's promise. By the late 1400s, castles like Constantinople's mighty walls fell to artillery, marking the twilight of medieval fortresses. You feel the ground tremble as a cannon fires, its shot cracking stone that once laughed at trebuchets. You wander toward the keep, passing the moat and turrets you fought to defend. Gunpowder, born in China centuries earlier, changed everything. Cannons could punch through walls that took years to build. Crac de Chevaliers, once impregnable, would have crumbled under sustained bombardment. You kick a shattered merlin, its dust coating your boots. Here's the quirky bit. Some lords tried cannon-proofing their castles with earthworks, piling dirt to absorb shots. You grin, picturing a noble shoveling like a frantic gardener, his dignity buried with the mud. Historians still argue whether gunpowder killed castles or just forced them to evolve. Some, like Dover, adapted with lower, thicker walls and bastions for their own cannons. You pause, imagining archers swapping bows for muskets, their grumbles louder than the gunfire. But adaptation wasn't enough for most. Castles became obsolete as warfare shifted to open fields and fortified towns. You recall the portcullis's clang, the knight's valor, relics of a fading age. Yet these fortresses linger as symbols, their stones whispering of defiance, betrayal, and survival. You reach the courtyard, its silence heavy. The siege is breaking, but the castle's purpose frays. Lords turn to palaces, trading battlements for luxury, while cannons redraw the map of power. You smirk, thinking of a knight trying to joust a cannonball, brave but doomed. The defenses you navigated, moats, drawbridges, turrets, were genius, but no match for Black Powder's brute math. You lean against the keep, its shadow long and tired. Castles didn't die, they transformed, their legacy carved in every ruin and tourist trap standing today. You take a final glance at the walls, their scars telling stories of manure defenses and desperate stands. The castle's heart was its people, knights, servants, even traitors, and their will to endure. As cannons reshape the world, these stones hold fast, a stubborn echo of a lost era. You exhale, the air soft with morning mist, ready to leave this fortress behind. The world grows quiet now, the castle's walls fading into a gentle blur. You're no longer on the ramparts, no longer dodging arrows or cannon fire. Picture yourself sinking into soft earth. The moats murmur a distant lullaby. Each stone, each story, settles like dust, leaving only calm. The night's shouts, the creak of the drawbridge, their whispers now, carried off by a cool breeze. You're safe, wrapped in the night's embrace, the siege a dream you've already half forgotten. Let your breath slow, your eyes drift shut. The castle stands, eternal, guarding you as you slip into sleep.